Hello. Thank you, distinguished guests, honorable judges, magistrates, judicial officers, ladies and gentlemen. A very good day or good evening to you all, depending on where you're joining us today from. My name is Esther Wawero. I work with Equality Now as the Senior Legal Advisor, and I will be your moderator for this day's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and especially to the ones who have joined on time. I know we have at least over 160 people who've registered, and we're hoping that they'll be able to join. So in the interest of time, I think we've got a good number for us to start. This webinar is organized by the Judicial Institute for Africa, the Association of Regional Magistrates of Southern Africa, and Equality Now. We're super excited to have you at this webinar, which is perhaps the very first one of its kind to celebrate the International Judicial Well-being Day, which is actually commemorated on the 25th of July. But because we're hosting this today, please allow me to say Happy International Judicial Well-being Day to all of us. Just as a way of background, on the 25th of July last year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Nauru Declaration on Judicial Well-being. This marked a historic turning point in global efforts to recognize and support the mental, emotional, and physical health of judges. This adoption led to the proclamation of 25th July as the International Day of Judicial Well-being, which we are observing, I guess, for the first time in this year. The Nauru Declaration was developed by nearly 20 judicial leaders and experts from around the world. And today, we are very privileged to have with us one of the authors of this momentous declaration, Judge José Matos. And this declaration is very important because this is the first time that the UN formally acknowledged judicial well-being as a matter of international importance. And this isn't just about wellness, it's about safeguarding the integrity of justice systems worldwide. So just to give you a quick run through of how today's webinar looks like, as we commemorate this first International Day of Judicial Well-being, we have lined up what we hope you'll find to be a very inspiring, thought-provoking, and real and deep reflections from renowned individuals. First up, we'll get to hear from one of the legal giants behind this declaration. Then we'll have a chance to really get into the lived realities and experiences of judicial well-being with reflections from Judge Jakkie Wessels and Judge Mathilda Twomey. After this, we'll get to hear about some practical tools for managing conflict and stress from Dr. Elaine Smith, who has worked with African judiciaries for several years. We'll give an opportunity for you, our participants, to engage with our speakers today in a brief quick Q&A session at the end of all the speakers. But just before we get into the juicy parts, allow me to take a moment to remind you, as we often do in these virtual spaces, a few ground rules. So first of all is to just always ensure that your device is muted throughout unless you are invited to take the floor. Please use the chat option to let us know your name and where you're joining us from. And lastly, since we have limited time, would encourage you to share your comments, your reflections, and questions on the chat, which we will be monitoring throughout. So please allow me to get us started by inviting our first speaker. Our main speaker today is Judge José Matos, who is a Court of Appeal judge in Porto. He is also an advisory board member of the Global Judicial Integrity Network, and he will be sharing with us the goal and intention behind setting aside a day to consider judicial well-being. Judge José Matos is the president of the Appeal Court of Porto in Portugal and serves as the honorary president of the International Association of Judges. He is an active member of the advisory board of the Global Judicial Integrity Network of the United Nations and holds the position of Vice President of the Consultative Council of European Judges at the Council of Europe. His past roles include serving as the President of the European Association of Judges for 5 years between 2016 to 2021, and as the Director of the legal journal Jalga. Additionally, he is an associate investigator at the Universidade de Coimbra. An accomplished author, Justice Matos has written and co-authored approximately a dozen books on judiciary-related topics and has lectured in over 40 countries across all continents, sharing his extensive knowledge and expertise in the field of judiciary. So welcome, Judge José. You've got 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esther, for your kind words and generous ones. I was one of the drafters of the Nauru Declaration, but there was many others involved. And I see me only as a small link of this huge network. Good afternoon to you all. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you. First, I would like to warmly thank Vanya Karth and the organizers of this webinar for the kind invitation, and above all for creating a space to share our project and raise awareness on this crucial topic of judicial well-being. My deep appreciation to all the colleagues and institutions that played a fundamental role in the creation of the Nauru Declaration, and thank you especially to those who registered and are today with us and join us. And of course, the appreciation to the fellow panelists. I know Mathilda, she's a wonderful colleague. The others I just knew now, but it's really a pleasure to be sharing this discussion with all of you. Well, my main role here is to reflect on the importance of judicial well-being and to offer an overview of Nauru Declaration. As it was explained already, my international experience creates me this idea that judicial well-being is, for the time being, in the present times, difficult times that we are living, an essential topic for judges and for the legal profession in general. It is also a global concern. Just to share with you a recent example, a few days ago, I was contacted by a colleague from Chile. They are working on a commission for psychosocial risk, an initiative that illustrates how seriously this issue is being addressed. But today, there are many countries in different parts of the world and in different regions that are concerned about this issue. The causes behind stress, burnout, and mental health risks in the judiciary are, as you know, very numerous. Some are very general and tied to life in modern societies. We can think about the overuse of technology, the isolation, especially in the after COVID times and what happened during COVID, a culture of constant pressure and the need for performance in general in all professions, now controlled by a digital way. But there is specific and often grave circumstances that affect particularly judges. And let me briefly list just a few of them. First, perhaps foremost, the solitude inherent to our work. That is a defining feature. The judge is always alone with the law and his conscience. And this feature comes with a cost. Secondly, and perhaps one of the most important that when mentioned in all the surveys, is the overwhelming workloads, the pressure to produce results with overwhelming workloads. Then the political pressure, especially in context of authoritarian regimes, populist regimes, with all the threats to judicial independence and rule of law. Also, the media scrutiny, and especially the social media aggression, often escalating to threats or exposure of our private lives and of our families, of our security. Also, the eroding privacy and increasing threats to security, particularly in Latin America, but also in Europe, North America, in parts of Africa. Complex forms of criminality, large-scale economic crimes that require sophisticated responses, often without resources. The emotional weight that is now pending over judges, especially those working on cases involving broken families, migration crisis. This is a very difficult and sensible topic, child abuse, or extreme poverty. Constant performance pressure, as if delays or inefficiencies rest solely on the shoulders of judges or prosecutors, despite multiple structural causes and reasons for that. And again, all of this happens with this haunting background, the solitude that is essential for the profession of being a judge. Perhaps one of the turning points about all these questions related with mental health was exactly the Nauru Declaration. It came from a collective effort, emerged from these collective efforts from judges from different parts of the world. And it was a lot based on the conclusions of the Global Judicial Integrity Network report and the survey that was made back in March 22 with answers from judges from 102 countries. And the results were rather spectacular in a very concerning way. 92% indicate that judicial work brings them stress, sometimes frequently, sometimes always. 89% of the judges answered that judicial colleagues are experiencing stress or anxiety. 97% of the judges answering to the survey said that more preeminence should be given to promoting judicial well-being. And 69% of them said that mental health and the issues related with stress and burnouts are still a taboo in legal professions. So, the Nauru Declaration. First, the methodology. It was based on a bottom-up approach, drawing from diverse realities across the globe, with a strong foundation in Pacific Islands, Australia, and New Zealand. Because, you know, Australia, New Zealand, these Pacific Islands like Nauru, and also Canada, were pioneers in the research, in the empirical search, in the scientific approach to the problem. And that is why we were based on this region. And there was, above all, a clear sense of urgency. Should be done. This topic should be put forward to create awareness. And this was the main factor for all the efforts that were consolidated in this document. There was a genuine commitment to effective teamwork. So, as you know, those who have the curiosity to read the declaration is based on 7 principles. The number 7 is a little bit a mystical number. It has to do with harmony in the systemic coherence, and the number is not. It has its own symbolic meaning. In ancient mythology, symbolizes fullness and completeness. And let's walk rapidly, trying to comment each one of those principles. First, essentiality. Judicial well-being is not a luxury, is not for judges, is for the effectiveness of the judicial system. It is essential in that sense and goes hand in hand with judicial efficiency. Second, bias. Judicial well-being is not a sign of weakness. The language of the declaration is clear and unapologetic. There is still this idea, this stigma about those who come forward explaining the problems they have on this issue of judicial well-being. Well, we must try to put an end to this bias. The third principle is based on another crucial idea, responsibility. This is not just an individual burden. Institutions have a central role to play. And this is very important. That is why Declaration exists, International Day exists. This is not something that each judge or each lawyer or each prosecutor should deal alone. It should be something that will be addressed by the institution, by the management bodies, by the presidents of the courts that have an essential role in trying to create not only awareness, but effective ways of fighting the problem the problems that arise on the level of mental health. The fourth is also very important because it's linked with the idea of judicial well-being, that is judicial integrity. Judicial integrity is, as you know, a basic value for all of us, judges, and those who work on the judiciary. Is something that is more than a commitment, is a way of life. And in this sense, when talking about judicial well-being, it's very important to speak hand-in-hand with also about judicial integrity, meaning zero tolerance for corruption, discrimination, or harassment, for instance, in workplace. The fifth principle is action. We should be determined. We should be proactive in trying to have some active measures to contravent the problem of judicial well-being, lack of judicial well-being. And then prevention, management, again, with a reference to those in charge, and awareness raising must be essential priorities. One of the idea of this webinar is exactly to create this awareness raising that is so important to start to deal with the problem and to finally start to solve it. Because if we don't admit that we have a problem, it is impossible to even start to think about solving it. The sixth principle is context. It's very important to think that there is no single model that fits all. This is not something like an artificial intelligence generated answer. There is no universal solution. We must think and be very clear that each jurisdiction is unique. Each jurisdiction demands concrete and specific answers to the problem. So we must always analyze the problem in the due context of the region, of the court, of for instance, the level of compliance with rule of law in the respective country, etc., etc. And finally, the seventh principle, that is perhaps my favorite, that averts to the need of a systemic vision for the problem of judicial well-being. The declaration calls for a systemic and comprehensive approach, grounded, as I said, in judicial integrity, but rooted in fundamental human rights. Judicial well-being is inseparable from the rule of law. If judges are the guardians of the rights, they are those who hold accountable people that are in power. We need to have a very strong structure behind judges. We need to have judicial well-being in our workplace. So these are the fundamental brief ideas that I will want to share with you. And I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives, to deepening this conversation together, and to have a debate. Thank you, and back to our moderator.
Muito obrigada, Judge José. I really appreciate your intervention. You've taken us through what I'd call a historical context, giving us the background. But more importantly, what I really loved is, the statistics that you gave us from the surveys, just these very staggering numbers of judges from 102 countries that participated in this survey that you mentioned, which really brought to the forefront the issues that they're struggling with. And also the 7 principles. I do love how you've taken us through all that, and particularly your parting shot that judicial well-being is inseparable from the rule of law. And it's really about the system holistically, with everyone having a shared responsibility. Many, many thanks for your insights. And again, thank you to you and the team of experts that worked on this Nauru Declaration and, bringing it to where we are, giving it that international importance that we are celebrating today, even in this webinar. And because you have laid a very good background for us, would now love to bring the faces, and get to hear some of the lived realities, not just the statistics, but people who really are on the bench to share their experiences. And allow me to now bring in and introduce Judge Jakkie Wessels, who is the regional court president of Limpopo in South Africa. She has been since 2009 and has also been a regional magistrate since 2003. She began her legal career as a prosecutor in 1983, later serving as an additional magistrate and legal educator. Judge Jackie's academic tenure at the University of South Africa and the Justice College has seen her develop courses in judicial skills. She is a seasoned trainer and has led capacity building on gender-based violence and femicide, cyber violence, and judicial development, and regularly lectures at the University of Pretoria and other institutions. She serves on the Rules Board for Courts of Law, has been doing that since 2012, chairing several committees, and she also sits on the South African Judicial Education Institute Council and the DGRU board at the University of Cape Town. She is a member of the Association of Regional Magistrates of Southern Africa. With over 25 years in legal training, she's contributed to national and regional initiatives, including UNODC publications and SADC projects, and has also co-edited The Right to Know, which is a book on access to information. Allow me now to welcome a very sought-after speaker, Judge Jakkie, to speak to us about her experiences on the bench. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Esther. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where the participants are, to this very historical webinar. It is such an honor to be part of a webinar where we can start to celebrate a really historic event, being tomorrow, the first International Day specifically for judicial well-being. The issue of judicial well-being has been something that we have been raising for many, many years, because we had seen and ourselves experienced the impact of the stress that we're working with, the traumatic material that we are being confronted with in our courts on a daily basis. Probably more than 10 years ago, we were doing a sexual offences workshop, and there was people coming in and they did a survey, and essentially it was found that all of us were emotionally burned out. The question, however, is always, how do we deal with this? And over the years, we have tried various initiatives. A lot of it would be service providers coming in and telling us, work-life balance, exercise, eat right. But that is not really all what it is about. I'll never forget, a couple of years ago, we had the service provider coming in, and she asked us to share some of the matters we dealt with that week. And I think it was about the 8th regional magistrate that shared and talked about a case that they did that week, at which state the facilitator burst into tears and ran out. Now, it's not very comforting to any of us if you have a wellness facilitator running out. And it's like, okay, what now? If we are traumatizing the facilitator, how are we supposed to feel? But one of the things that I think is extremely important is the ability to communicate with people that understand what this is about, because that's one of our big issues. most of us can't really talk to our families about what we heard and experienced in our courts. We're traumatizing them. They don't really understand. And at the end of the day, one of the initiatives that we had been working on was that we need to be there for each other. I read an interesting blog on the Global Judicial Integrity newsletter about Austria's intervisions, where they will get together and talk about specific topics. And that is something that we had been doing here as well, where we would make time every time we meet to just share the good and the bad with each other. Because in the end of the day, we are the people that understand what we are talking about. One of the things that for me is extremely important and that I think assist in particular new judicial officers coming in, but also for us that maybe been around too long, as some may think, is mentorship programs where you can have somebody that understands and yet you can confide in and that can help you to manage the stress, the workload, the public scrutiny, the relentless search for perfection, for making sure that you have done justice in the best possible way. It is extremely important that there needs to be a culture shift where we value the humanity of judicial officers as much as we value the quality of the jurisprudence and their work. And we really do need to find a way to ensure that it is institutionalized. In the end of the day, judicial wellness cannot be kept in silence or to the peripheral anymore. It really is the cornerstone of a fair, effective, humane justice system. And hopefully this International Day for Judicial Wellness and the Declaration has laid the groundwork for a global movement that can really recognize that the well-being of judicial officers is integral to the rule of law. And the role of mentors and peer networks and institutional leadership is critical to let this movement grow and to sustain the momentum. And essentially, in the end of the day, by investing in the well-being of judicial officers, we're essentially confirming our commitment, not just to justice, but also to the people who deliver that. Thank you, Esther.
Absolutely brilliant, Jakkie. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections on from the bench, the practical lived realities, and also highlighting some of the concerns. But I also love that you're pointing some solutions, and hopefully when we get to hear from Dr. Helen, some of this will really be strengthened in terms of practical tools. I love, that you're speaking about the need to reinforce the commitment to justice, and that this really means that at the very core of the rule of law is, judicial well-being, and that we cannot keep it at the periphery. But also you've drawn the long history of this being a conversation that didn't just start in 2024 with the adoption of the declaration, but it's something that you've been calling for. And, I do agree with you that we're hoping that this International Day of Judicial Well-being will really continue to bring to the fore and ensure that this becomes and remains a matter that is being discussed at the international level. But I love that you also spoke about the need to institutionalize this, having mentorship and peer networks, and most importantly, just fostering solidarity among judicial officers in this very tough fight. So thank you so much, Jakkie, for that. Up next, we'll hear the experiences and reflections from Judge Mathilda Twomey. She is a sessional justice at the Supreme Court of Appeal in Seychelles, and she is a distinguished legal scholar and jurist with a career spanning more than 4 decades. Mati serves as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, served as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Seychelles from 2015 to 2020 as the first woman to hold that position. Yay. She currently sits as a sessional judge of the Court of Appeal, as I said, and she has held notable roles in legal reform, education, and judicial development across Africa, including serving as Seychelles on the Seychelles Constitutional Commission, and is the academic director of the Judicial Institute for Africa, where she has designed and led training for judicial officers, prosecutors, and lawyers across Africa and Asia. Judge Twomey sits on advisory boards of the UNODC, Global Judicial Integrity Network, and the Judicial Integrity Group, and serves as the Executive Secretary of the African Judicial Training Network. She is also a member of the Association of Regional Magistrates of Southern Africa, and as a recipient of the Franco-German Human Rights Prize, she continues to publish scholarly work and contribute to high-level judicial and governance initiatives. Please, Judge Twomey, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. You're too kind. I acknowledge José and Jakkie, Hélène, and everybody else here this afternoon. I endorse much of the strains on judicial work, on judicial officers, on the judiciary that José and Jakkie have spoken about. I think we would all like to think that the judiciary, which is meant to be the guardian of justice, to be impartial, to be independent, and obviously to be insulated from external pressures. But what I want to chat a little bit about is what happens when the scales of justice are tilted by stress, executive overreach, and political interference, which many of us experience daily. My lived experience reveals a system under strain where upholding the rule of law means battling what I'd like to call unseen forces. So perhaps I'll come from quite a gloomy background, and I hope to then finish on a hopeful note. I'd like to look at 4 specific, I suppose, parts of what I've just referred to. The first one I'd like to call the weight of stress in judicial work, which has been touched upon by the other speakers. I mean, judicial duty is inherently high stakes, and the burden multiplies when decisions carry political consequences. Chronic stress arises not just from complex cases, for which we have been trained to attend to, but I think the stress comes from the fear of backlash, whether that is overt or subtle. The expectation of impartiality often clashes with the reality of what I'd like to call psychological and professional strain. There's a core tension in judicial work. There's a disconnect between this idealized role of a judge, that neutral, unflappable, above human frailty being, and the very real emotional and professional pressures that can undermine that ideal. The second part is executive interference, that invisible hand. Governments and powerful figures often exert pressure. Sometimes that is discreet, for example, in terms of delayed appointments to the judiciary, or it could be budget cuts. Other times it is very overt, public criticism, veiled threats. And many of us know that cases with political implications, especially at the moment, a lot of us are dealing with election petitions, and we face heightened scrutiny, and it creates a kind of a chilling effect, both on judicial autonomy, but our well-being as well. This myth of a separate judiciary crumbles when our rulings are questioned, not on merit, but on their alignment with political agendas. So thirdly, I come into this political interference scene, where justice is really a pawn. When judicial appointments become politicized, independence, I feel, erodes from within. There are these public narratives that paint judges as activists or obstructionists, and that undermines trust in the institution. The line between lawful oversight and intimidation blurs, forcing judges to self-censor. So, for example, what I mean, lawful oversight, which includes normal checks on judicial power, like appellate reviews or legitimate public criticism, is most often overtaken by intimidation, which crosses the line into coercion. Threats, smear campaigns, weaponized investigations designed to punish judges for unpopular rulings. The distinction blurs when oversight tools are misused to harass judges under the guise of accountability, creating a chilling effect, as I've explained. So some judges alter rulings to avoid controversial cases, or they impose harsher sentences to evade political labeling, and that has an impact on the self when you go home at night. Others recuse themselves from high-profile matters due to safety concerns, or they soften their opinions to escape this media frenzy that José talked about. This erosion of judicial courage makes justice reactive to power rather than law, and that, again, undermines public trust. Protecting judges from intimidation isn't about shielding them from criticism, I would say. It's about safeguarding the impartiality the rule of law demands. So fourthly, I come to what the impact all that has, the personal toll and the ethical dilemmas. We want to balance duty with self-preservation. So I ask myself the question, do I rule by conscience? Or do I compromise to avoid isolation? Whistleblowing risks career destruction. Silence perpetuates what I would call systemic decay. The irony for us all is that judges are tasked with upholding fairness, and yet we often find ourselves denied that very fairness. So what is it that I would like to close with? Well, we ask judges to be pillars of impartiality, untouched by fear, by fatigue, or fury even. Yet, if I may say, no robe is thick enough to shield us against the weight of stress, the whisper of political pressure, or the isolation of moral dilemmas. If we want fair courts, we must care for the humans who sit on the bench. Amid the storms of stress, interference, and impossible expectations, we must remember that safeguarding our well-being isn't selfish, it's strategic. A justice system built on the backs of exhausted, fearful, or broken justice is not a justice system at all. So how do we endure? Well, we have to name the pressure. Silence magnifies stress. We have to acknowledge the weight, whether it's political interference, public vitriol, or the loneliness of the bench. We have to speak to trusted peers or seek professional support. None of us are weak for asking for help. The system is weak for failing to provide it. So what do? Well, set boundaries. Our integrity depends on it. We have to guard our mental space. We have to turn off the news. We have to delegate when overwhelmed, and that's not a weakness. We have to say no to unethical demands. A compromised judge cannot deliver uncompromised justice. And we have to demand institutional change. Wellness isn't yoga and medication. It's not just about that. It's structural. We have to advocate for confidential mental health resources for judges. We have to have clear protocols to report interference without retaliation. We have to have peer support networks to combat isolation. And finally, and I think Jakkie has touched on that as well, we have to reclaim our humanity. We are more than our robes. We have to nurture relationships, hobbies, moments of joy. And we have to find our own sanctuary and retreat to it whenever we can. The world needs judges, yes, but they also need judges who've tasted life outside the courtroom. And I'd like to end on that note. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mati. Indeed, you took us through a journey of the harsh reality. It is gloomy, but there is hope, as you have ended on that very high note. What I really loved about your intervention, and Jakkie as well, is that you really did speak to all the 7 core principles of the Nauru Declaration that Judge José spoke to us about. And I think for me, the important message that you have brought forth is balance isn't just about the facts that are presented before you as judges. It's about the need to balance between duty and self. And at the very core of this is self-preservation and the humanity of judges that must at all times be upheld and safeguarded. I love that you have also talked about the need to speak out and that silence is not the way to go. Which speaks again to the issue of this is not about weakness. It's about strength, and it's about ensuring that we're preserving that strength of judicial officers. So thank you so much. As we get into the next section, we will get to hear a few of the practical tools from Dr. Ellen Smith, who has worked in the area of applying depth psychology to leadership and organizations for the last 30 years. She was a visiting senior lecturer at the University of Cape Town Graduate School of Business in the areas of psychological literacy, systems thinking, people skills, change management, diversity management, and facilitation management for 14 years. She served as the program director for the National Diploma in Facilitation offered by the South African College of Applied Psychology for 5 years. She currently looks after the MBA groups at Henley Business School, and her company, Feather Associates Limited, has been working with some of South Africa's leading corporations, educational institutions, non-governmental organizations, and local and national governments since 1992. And as I said at the beginning, she has also worked with several African judiciaries for so many years. And I do believe that, she will share with us some of the practical tips and tools that can continue to buttress the conversation that we're having, but help us to already begin to imagine some of the practical solutions to the issues that we are discussing today. So welcome, Dr. Ellen. Sorry, you're muted.
Good afternoon, evening, good morning, everybody. Sorry, muted there. And thank you very much, Esther, for that introduction. And I was fascinated, José, by the history that you explained, and then the experiences of both Jakkie and Mati of what it's like being a judge. So I promise I won't run from the room. if I hear how bad things are, just because I have had my whole life has been about psychological support for various people in various situations. I've had the privilege of working with JIFA for probably 7 or 8 years, working with judges from and senior judges from the SADC region. And so I have some idea of what you go through. I also coach some judges in my personal capacity. But I was very fascinated, José, by what you said, because I did my PhD on leadership integrity and the incredible complexity that sits behind integrity, and that psychological well-being is central to the capacity to behave with integrity. Particularly this idea that if we're not psychologically integrated inside us, we don't behave in an integrated way and we don't behave with integrity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to give you a few practical tips and tools. I'm not going to say to you, do exercise, rest, eat well. That stuff goes without saying. I am going to talk a little bit about, from what I call a depth psychology perspective, which is the idea of the unconscious. And I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try and do what I can in a short time. Can I ask those of you who feel willing to put your cameras on, if you're not in your pajamas, I don't know if at this time of the day people are in their pajamas or not, it'd be lovely to see a few more faces. Obviously, you don't have to if you don't feel comfortable, but it would be wonderful to see a few more faces, because then it feels like I'm talking to an audience, not just, you know, some little squares on a screen. And it's just nice to see people. All right, I am going to share my screen. Oh, can you just, sorry, Esther, or whoever's the host, can you just allow me to share my slides? Just sent a request for that. Okay, let's see. I should be able to share now. My PowerPoint, let's share. And let me just get the actual. Hopefully you should all now be able to see some slides.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of what I call, how do you develop a thriving psyche in the midst of enormous external pressure? And I'll be happy to share these slides. I'll send them to JIFA, and then JIFA can distribute them to participants. Many of you may have heard of a man called Carl Jung, and he said that the world today hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. And this idea that, you know, Matty, you spoke so much about it, Jakkie, that the way the world runs, the whole system is dependent on psychological choices on a daily basis, and the capacity for that environment to be, for the psyche to manage in difficult environments. For those of you not familiar with the word psyche, it comes from the Greek, and it poetically means breath, life, or soul, but it essentially refers to the totality of all our mental and emotional processes, but most importantly, that they're both conscious and unconscious. I read a very interesting little snippet of news the other day that apparently there was a man who, I think it's in the States, sleepwalked and murdered his in-laws, and he was acquitted because they showed that he sleepwalked right the way through the crime. Now, I'm going to argue that we have a sleeping self, an unconscious self, and a conscious self, and those make up all of us. You know, they make up the totality of us. And so I think I might have disagreed with the verdict in that particular case, but obviously I don't know all the details. But I'm going to suggest that all of us have this complex totality of bits that we're conscious of and bits that we're unconscious of. I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of what is stress. Very basically, when the demands made on you from your environment exceeds your resources and capabilities, and those are both your practical capabilities, but your internal psychic capabilities. And I'm going to speak about that. Ongoing exposure to stress leads to an imbalance, resulting imbalance in the homeostasis, which results in breakdown. And it was so interesting, Jakkie, when you said so many people were close to that kind of burnout or breakdown situation. Basically, the stress process is that there's a lot of environmental and internal stresses, so demands on us. financial problems, being exposed to trauma, a range of things. Then we've all got kind of what we call moderating personal characteristics. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And depending on the interaction between the stresses and who we are, we then have a various degree of strain. Different people cope better with stress than others. There's a whole range of moderating personal characteristics, and we can do a 3-day course on this. I'm just going to give you some feel of it. Some of it, how self-aware we are, how emotionally intelligent we are, how hardy we are, for example, how much we like ourselves or not, clarity of goals, how many social support systems we've got, and listening to Matty and, this idea of solitude, a lot of things that other people can rely on to moderate their stress are just not there for judges because of the very unusual nature of the role. But I'm particularly going to talk about the level of psychological integration that makes a big difference. So strain develops when the stress response isn't counteracted. So we've got these two wonderful nervous systems, a sympathetic nervous system, which is the arousal and activation to cope with stress. And then we've got a parasympathetic nervous system, which calms us down, the sort of rest and calming system. The problem is the more prolonged the stress, the more our self-regulation can't work. So we have got wonderful self-regulation. And let me just also say, if we grew up with parents who knew how to teach us to self-regulate, but many of us are not that lucky. So we might initially not have a great self-regulating system. And then if we have massive prolonged stress, then that parasympathetic nervous system can't do its job either. And then people eventually take a lot of strain. Our responses to stress can either be positive or destructive. I've just got some examples here. We can confront the stress, defend against it, withdraw from it. And depending on what we choose, some of it's going to be more helpful than others. I'm not going to get into detail about those defenses, but they're complex and they're very much driven by a person's internal support systems. And these are the normal things people will say to you. So how do you cope? Sorry, just jumping here. How do you cope? Healthy coping mechanism, exercise, nutrition, rest, relaxation, recovery, self-reflection, being able to confront and resolve, getting social support. And I think, we could talk a lot about all of this, but it's stuff that you probably know. My guess is you are probably quite well aware of the need for some of the more obvious stuff. So what I chose to speak about tonight is perhaps something that's not as obvious or people are not as familiar with, and this idea of a relationship with the resources of the unconscious mind. That we've got a massive resource internally that if we have access to it, can really help us. Just by the way, I know we've got a Q&A at the end, but if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, I don't mind being interrupted. So if somebody does just want to interrupt me, that's also okay. Esther will just help us with that process, but I'm quite happy to take questions. Okay, so I need to give a little bit of depth psychology briefly. And the depth psychology theory is going to take me, 5 or 10 minutes to do, a little bit of a background on how actually the psyche divides itself into these two parts. And then I will speak about what we can do about it. So I don't know how many of you have ever come across what's known as the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. In Norway, they've got this amazing vault of all the seeds in the world, that if there is a catastrophe, we can go find those seeds and start all again. Now, human beings are, I'm going to argue, born with also a little seed vault inside all of us. And that seed vault inside us is what we call your bank of archetypes. Now, Carl Jung, he was a depth psychologist, spoke about that we come with the potential for all ways of being human. We're born with this incredible capacity to lead, to follow, to play, to compete, we come with all this potential. And as we socialized over time, those seeds germinate, and then they become parts of our identity and our toolkit or not, depending on our early environment. So these archetypes are, I've just used emojis here, there's a variety of them. And even things that may seem a little strange might actually be necessary. So the capacity to be angry or the capacity to be sad, they're all parts of ourselves that are useful in metabolizing stress, metabolizing life. In fact, I'm going to argue that emotions are our little soldiers. They're our little worker bees. They help us make sense of things, they help us understand how to make meaning, and they help us come to terms with and metabolize various events that happen to us. Now, what happens is we're born with a seed bank, but very early on, we are faced with two conflicting forces. And this goes on throughout our lives. And Matty, for me, you spoke a little bit about this. The one force is, Carl Jung said, we want to be whole, we want to express our full potential, we want to be authentically who we are. On the other side, we've got to survive. And humans, because we're primates, can only survive by belonging. In other words, we need to keep whatever social system we're in happy with us. And initially, that's the parental system, the early caregiving system. But later on, it may be the political environment where we're appointed as judges. So we continually have that tension inside us about how authentic are we, how much can we be ourselves, and how risky is that, and how much do we have to silence ourselves to survive in systems. So these forces play themselves out. And really, this slide captures the core theory that underlies depth psychology. So very basically, I've got a couple of circles here divided into some sections. And I'd like you to think those circles represent the human psyche. And the human psyche has got compartments. It's not one integrated part. And I'm going to argue that there are 4 essential compartments. The first compartment is that of the public conscious, the part of ourselves we can show, the part we know about, the part we can be public about. The second part is what is our private conscious. And you can kind of imagine this a little bit like a house. So a house has got a front veranda that's very public, but it's also got, it's got a lounge or a room where we receive people, that's public. But all houses have got bedrooms or more private spaces where things we know about, but we don't necessarily share with other people. Then in our psyche, we've also got this incredibly mysterious thing called the individual unconscious, where we have experiences, but for various reasons, we may not even be aware of them any longer, and we may not show them. And then finally, we've got a compartment known as the persona or the mask, where we pretend. It's kind of, the facade that we all have and need to put on. And Matty, you talked about that. I'm not sure if it was you or Jakkie, this facade of having to be the kind of balanced, impartial, together judge. But we all know that that's not the truth of the whole person. So what happens is our potential, those archetypes get activated, and depending on the environmental response, are placed in compartments inside us. So let's just have a look at it. So we have all these potential ways of being human inside us, parts. We've got this inherent drive to fulfill our potential. So as we start interacting with the world as babies, those parts get activated. If we're cold, we might cry. If we, feel loved, we might be, smile and be happy. So all these different parts get activated. When they get triggered and we try them out, depending on the reaction of our caregivers, we learn whether those parts are acceptable and we can do more of them or not. And so we then make them part of our identity or not. So we might learn that being curious is fine, being happy is fine, being loving is fine. We might learn that. However, at the same time, for all of us, there are parts of ourselves that when they get triggered, they start triggering disapproval from other people, from caregivers, from teachers, from grandparents, from friends, from siblings. And so we start learning that to survive, and the only way to survive as a primate is to belong to the social group. So if we get disapproval from the social group, we may be ejected. So to belong, we learn to hide. We start learning that certain parts of ourselves need to be put away. Now, some of this is just socially appropriate, and we need to hide parts of ourselves. But some of it may not be. Some of it may be around survival, and we start hiding parts of ourselves which actually are damaging to us to not have those parts. And then what happens if we get severe disapproval? Some parts of ourselves become so potentially threatening to our survival that we end up locking them in basements in our unconscious. In other words, we even hide them from ourselves and then we then put on a little mask. And so a lot of who we are could be buried in a basement inside us that we don't even know about. A lot of the parts that can be helpful. And I want to say something about the solitude. What's important to understand is human beings are multiple parts inside them. There's not just one part of us. There could be a part of us that's the calm adult, but there's another part that might be a playful child or a critical parent or a part that's very sad. And to deal with a multiplicity inside us is also a complex business. The more in touch we are with the multiplicity of parts, the more resourceful we are to deal with whatever happens to us. Just want to stop there for 1 minute. Anybody got questions or comments just about this little picture? This is the most important core idea of what I'm going to speak about. Just going to give a moment to see if anybody's got anything. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. Okay. I'm not watching the chat. So unfortunately, I've just got one screen tonight. So if you pick up something in the chat, maybe, Esther, you can alert me to it.
Sure.
Okay.
Nothing so far.
Now what we find out is some of our archetypes, our potential, are hidden or buried. Some of who we are is beneath the surface, and a lot of that may be our creativity and our wisdom might be it. And according to Jung, our psyche is inherently purposeful, or as he calls it, teleological. And the purpose of the psyche, both consciously and unconsciously, is the development of the full potential of the human being. He calls this process individuation, where we become fully ourselves by developing and integrating potential parts of the self throughout our lives. And our psyche is hugely creative and generative. Also, the psyche is a marvelously self-regulating system like the body, and will try to regulate or balance any characteristics or parts that are out of balance. So this little definition I came up with a couple of months ago that says, our psyche's purpose is to continuously explore, experience, express, and extend our full life force, driving us to thrive. And sometimes it behaves in non-obvious ways. Sometimes the way we're living is actually bad for our life force, and so the psyche throws a few obstacles in our way. It makes us sick, or it makes us break down, or it drives us unconsciously to do things which are trying to alert us to the fact that we're not thriving. And so what happens is, according to Jung, this is theory, not fact, but it's theory. Jung said we're born with a whole potential self that then splits into two. We split into what's known as the ego, and I don't mean it here in the kind of Buddhist sense of it's bad. I mean it just the reality-based coping self becomes our conscious driver of the personality. But all our other potential still sits there under the surface. And over time, if we can integrate those two parts, we become more and more fully ourselves, and we have a kind of an integrated whole actualized self where the different parts are talking to each other, and the part that's most appropriate in that moment takes charge of the situation. But this picture does mean that we've got two ships to the captain. Two captains on the ship. If we are a little ship, we've got the captain who's looking on the surface and can see the top of the iceberg, but we've also got another captain that can see the whole show and can see what's under the iceberg coming. Ideally, what gives us the greatest resilience and capacity to cope with stress is starting to have a conversation between those two captains. The captain that does coping with life and the captain that does what's under the surface. So there are different goals for the conscious and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind's goals are to develop a distinct and consolidated identity, to organize our experience meaningfully. I'm going to move this. To help manage the relationship with the external world, and to provide a stable foundation amidst all those competing forces. Unconscious mind has got a slightly different. Manage the elements that are unbearable or unacceptable to consciousness, metabolize those experiences and regulate the whole well-being inside us, to balance conscious one-sidedness. If we work too hard, at some point it's going to make us collapse and say, hang on, you're too one-sided. To offer a continual stimulus for the further development of the individual. I love this quote from Jung, which says that Our unconscious contains, and I'm going to read it because I go through slowly because it's important. Everything of which I know, but of which I'm not at the moment thinking. Everything of which I was once conscious, but have now forgotten. Everything perceived by my senses, but not noted by my conscious mind. Everything which involuntarily and without paying attention to it, I feel, think, remember, want, and do. All the future things that are taking shape in me and will sometime come to consciousness. All this is the content of the unconscious. So we have this massive resource sitting inside us. To become our whole actualized self, we must gradually dismantle our conscious superstructures and embrace the work of the unconscious mind. But we have another thing that happens. In addition to suffering conflicting drives, we suffer trauma, which complicates psychic function. And judges have a double problem here. On the one hand, you've got your own trauma of your own life, and everybody has to deal with illness, death, struggle, accidents and incidents. We all have to deal with that stuff. But judges are continually exposed to vicarious trauma. In other words, they're continually witnessing and hearing the detail of other people's trauma. So they are doubly traumatized, their own trauma, but dealing with all the people that, I mean, I suppose it depends on what kind of court you sit, but many judges hear the range. So you've got all this trauma happening to you. So now I've got the same picture as before, but I'm going to add something to it, and I'm just going to put it up quickly. Some of those archetypes inside us, when we're traumatized, same pictures before, they get wounded. So those big red things are now we have what are wounds inside us, and I like to think about them as landmines. So landmines are unprocessed trauma inside us that then can implode or explode when they're not dealt with and handled properly. And so that makes your lives a lot more complicated. And you're continually dealing with people with landmines inside them that are being traumatized, exploding or imploding in some way. So how do we help the unconscious do its work? Well, we need to form a relationship with the unconscious. Between the two, we need to ensure that the unconscious mind has space to do its work. We need to learn the language of the unconscious mind, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight, but not too much detail. And we need to listen to and attend to unconscious communication. The problem with the unconscious mind is it's got a language. It's trying to talk to us all the time, but it's symbolic. The unconscious is a poet. It speaks in all pictures and symbols. And José, I love the way you introduced when you talked about the symbolic value of the number 7, and that it's got wholeness, that actually our unconscious mind is working with a symbolic value of everything all the time. Symbolism is this very richly textured language. Anything like objects, pictures, sounds, or whatever are all combined to represent aspects of our life experience. And something very exciting happens when the conscious and the unconscious minds connect. When a symbol is noticed, it connects the two parts of our mind. When somebody suddenly catches our eye, we notice the light on the leaves, or we notice the way somebody moves, suddenly our deeper unconscious mind is active too. The unconscious uses the imagination, dreams, impulses in the body to express itself symbolically. I don't know if you've ever sat in your courtroom and felt your body reacting, your skin crawling, a headache developing, your body reacting to what's happening in front of you. Each individual will have their own symbolic system because it's quite unique to the individual's life experience. And symbols can hold multiple meanings at any one time. I've got a little bit of an example here of something like water. Water can have all those meanings, practical meanings, spiritual meanings, creative meanings. And so our psyche has got the capacity to work with all those meanings at once if we pay attention to it. And it will give us information about what's going on with us, with our system, with the people in front of us. And so starting to read some of that symbolic stuff is very helpful. The unconscious mind is striving for wholeness when it pushes us to fall in love or experience hate. Falling in love is not a business of meeting somebody who's perfectly suited for you. We know that we fall in love with people who are going to best activate our wounding, and we will be perfectly matched in terms of sorting out some of our traumatic history, unfortunately. Intuition is our deepest intelligence, where unconscious psyche speaks without intervention from the conscious mind. So there's all these different channels of communication. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about how they all work, but what I do want to talk a little bit finally about is for us to have a thriving psyche, we need to be curious about our irrational impulses, because they may often reflect unconscious bias. Attend to our imagination and dreams and interpret the symbols they produce. Attend to our body symptoms. Our body's telling us all the time what's really going on. Notice when we strongly love or hate and be curious about it. Notice and follow our intuition. Very importantly, embrace psychodiversity. In other words, get to know all those different parts inside you and make friends with those different parts and kind of there's a word for it, enlist them in making sense of our own stress responses. Striving for win-win conflict resolution. I'm not going to talk too much about that because that's not so much in your work, but more in your personal life as leaders. Notice and heal our wounds through therapy if needed, or some form of counseling. And there we have to get rid of the stigma, because it's very important for people to be able to deal with trauma that they've had and get, just as you might go to a personal trainer to have a strong body, to get therapy if you needed to have a strong psyche. And most importantly, ensuring emotional processing and expression. Let me go back 1 minute. Our psyches are wonderfully designed to be able to metabolize even quite serious trauma. But part of the work is to do appropriate emotional processing and expression, to be able to talk about things, to be able to feel things, to allow emotions to do their work. And if we don't have that space, that stuff all gets bottled up inside us and ends up making us unwell. Okay, that's all I've got for the moment. I've run through it quite quickly, but I'm now open to questions, thoughts, general discussion.
Wow, that's just simply amazing, Helen. Lots to ponder. I think what I loved towards the end is, as much as you started by saying you're not going to give us practical tips, you did actually tell us 9 things to do for a thriving psyche. And I loved that. I hope and it's good that you're going to share the slides with us. And I also loved the the 2 captains in a ship, and how we get them to speak to each other in order to bring out, the personality and the archetypes that we really define who we are. I don't see any questions yet on the chat, but I'll open it up now for people to raise their hands and take the floor, or even to still continue using the chat. And I think it doesn't have to be questions. If you've got any reflections or a particular experience that you want to share that really resonates with the issues that we're discussing today in this theme of balancing our roles, our duty, and the self, I'd welcome you to do that. Yes, I've got one hand up. Judge William, please go ahead.
Thank you so very much. When she spoke about the fact that the impact of trauma causes wounds on the psyche, I think I can relate to that. When I joined the judiciary in Zambia some 10 years ago, I was in the commercial court. I was then transferred. I'm currently in the Family and Children's Division. Yeah. And I suspect that in this new division, it's much more traumatic compared to how I felt when I was in the commercial court. Thank you so much.
Yes, William, that would certainly be the case. Sorry, Esther, did I interrupt?
No. Go ahead.
Because you're dealing with, probably if it's a woman, the children's court, you're dealing with abuse cases, you're dealing with severe trauma often, my guess is. And just listening to someone's story would have caused some traumatic impact on you too. So that would make a lot of sense. And some kind of trauma debriefing would be helpful and necessary if people do that kind of work. Just to be also say, you know, and I think different jurisdictions are going to have different cultures around this. There are some places where things like therapy is seen as accepted as normal, and other places where it's not. So therapy doesn't have to be the only way. People often are able to process some of their trauma in whatever, in the churches they're in. Sometimes they've got pastors or ministers who can really help them, good partners, good friends. There are many ways of being able to work with trauma. But if you do feel that you've got a particular issue with trauma, it is important to maybe get professional assistance, and there are trauma specialists who know how to help you, particularly with severe trauma if you've been exposed to it. I'm also open. I can give my email address, and I can, you know, if anybody wants to ask further, they can do that. Oh, but yes, I see there's a question in the chat. Yes, thank you. Esther, I'm back to you.
Thank you. Any more hands as we're waiting for that? I think just on the point that Judge William shared, I think increasingly one of the glaring gaps that we're seeing is the absence of institutionalized psychosocial support within different judiciaries. And I think just to borrow one of the points that I believe it was Mati or Jakkie who shared about the solidarity and how I think different judicial officers have found comfort and a sense of solidarity in sharing their different experiences. I think that's also another area to explore, I would say. Looking to see if there's any hands or comment in the chat. Nothing.
People may feel a little bit shy asking questions in front of the group, but it'd be lovely to hear from any of you want to share any of your experiences. That would be good too.
We got one in the chat from Judge Dlamini, and he asks to any of the panelists, are you aware of jurisdictions where there are formal mechanisms to address wellness for the judiciary? And he says in his jurisdiction, there is none. Is that from South Africa? I'm guessing, yeah.
That's from Eswatini. That's from Eswatini.
Okay. Do you know Mati or anyone?
I know from my experience in working with judges in Southern and Eastern Africa, we all ask for it, we all push for it. There's no formalized system, there is no funding. You are practically left to your own devices.
That's very much, I think, everybody's experience that I know of. Like I said, unfortunately, they've tried here with us, but it is limited. It is not really focused on the understanding of what we as judicial officers do, because it's like generalized sort of, you know, the same ones that is being used for any kind of business, etc. And that often create the conflict, like I've told you, that the facilitators can't even handle talking to us, hearing what we are dealing with every day.
Yeah, and we have another question related to that from Judge Nriva, asking how best can judiciaries develop mechanisms to provide psychosocial support to their officers? Helen, would you like to offer some insights, or Mati?
No, I wanted to say that we are in a kind of a special place as judicial officers, because a lot of the work that we do is confidential, and a lot of the stuff that we have is very hard to share with a psychologist or somebody where we might not feel safe. I come from a very small jurisdiction, and I know my colleague who's just asked the question, Judge Dlamini, comes from a very small jurisdiction as well. And you have that feeling that you might get found out, or you might get shown up for being weak, for getting help. So there is still that element of stigma attached, but there's also a paucity of trained individuals who can address that specific space where judges are coming from. Anyway, that's my experience.
Mati and Helen, I'm going to give you some bit of little homework as we listen from Judge Winner. And my question is, what will it take to get this institutional psychosocial support? Just think about it as we hear from Judge Winner.
Yes, good evening, everybody, or morning, wherever you're coming, wherever you are at the moment. I just basically just want to, I'm a judge of the High Court, and I'm based in Livingstone, which is the tourist capital of Zambia. I just basically just wanted to talk about the issue of vicarious trauma, in the sense that I get to hear, I mean, like all the other judges, we get to do criminal sessions, and we sit on, preside over criminal matters. And obviously there's a lot of things that we hear on that. So I just, right now I'm actually sitting here, and I've got, I did a, how can I, a course, a church-based course that I did. It was a 2-year course, and as I sit here, there's actually a mental wellness webinar that is actually taking place on that is clashing with this. So I've got my phone here. I'm not listening, but I'm just looking at and I'm just appreciating the fact that there is that resource that is there, that is actually, there are things out there that are available with regard. They recognize the issue of mental wellness even in the church base. So there's a resource that basically I can reach to and be able to. So basically my point I want to make is that there's something there that would help. I mean, being a judge is different from the issue of the way it is out there, but there is that resource that is there for us, and I'm happy to be able to, that the issue of mental wellness is so important that even the churches talk about it, even the faith-based issues they talk about. So it's just nice to know that there is that resource that we can also that depend on. Basically, that's just basically what I wanted to share.
Great. Thank you so much, Judge Winner, for sharing that. Still coming back to you, Mati and Helen, and also pulling in Judge José and Judge Jakkie to help to respond to that earlier question of what it will actually take for us to see solutions being provided to judicial officers for their well-being. We've got a comment and a question from Judge Chenda, who asks whether we know of any jurisdictions where the induction training for the leadership judges incorporates the very useful issues of the psyche, as discussed by Dr. Helen, so that their personal circumstances and background don't affect the quality of their leadership. And I guess this also extends to, judges who are dispensing justice.
Yeah, I think Helen can speak to that. She has been leading a leadership course for JIFA for the past number of years. So maybe Helen, you can speak to that, of what's available.
Yes, so JIFA has run for a number of years a senior leadership, judicial leadership course where we spent a lot of time teaching the psychological literacy and talking about these things. And I'm supposed to start answering the question that's on the table from you, Esther, is the more everyone talks about it, the more they bring it into the conversation, the zeitgeist, to say it is completely appropriate to support judges in this way, the more likely institutions and jurisdictions will feel pressure to start developing support systems. One other thing is COVID gave us a big gift in that the whole world is now open to us for getting online support. And psychologists are trained and they're bound by confidentiality, and right across the world there are people that are prepared to work online and support one. Obviously you have to choose people carefully, but there's also, I think from an institutional point of view, the more people talk about it, the greater I think the opportunity to develop the support systems. But personally, there's scope for you individually to reach out and maybe get some support. And I know JIFA has supported offering coaching. I did some coaching last year with several judges, female judges in South Africa. So, you know, JIFA offered some of that support.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. So, Matthias, you take the floor. Is that leadership course open? How do people enroll, especially, you know, across judiciaries that are probably not even represented on the webinar today?
Our leader, Vanya, I don't know that she can hear us, she's constantly engaged in the battle to get funding. As you know, we all facing huge constraints now, especially since the USAID funding has just stopped completely. So the battle is funding. The battle is funding. I mean, we have really good facilitators, and Elaine has been, you know, leading that for a number of years for us. So our hope is to run another one again next year. Elaine runs it over 2 years. So everybody who is here today can let us know if you are interested in such a course. We will keep your name on a database. And when the opportunity arises, we will let you know about it. Thank you.
Great. As we're waiting for more questions, I'll just ask each of our speakers, so starting with Judge José, back to that question of what will it take? And for you specifically, how do we actually move closer to seeing the aspirations of the declaration coming to life and really changing the realities in the courtrooms and at home for our judicial officers? And then I'll come to Marty, Jakkie, and then to Marty, and finally to Ellen before we close.
Okay, since it's my final intervention, let me give you a broader consideration about what I heard, and to say how much I learned in this webinar. All of the panelists have very insightful approaches to the problem. I was, like everyone, moved by the very inspirative and sensitive and challenging words of Mathilda about the persecution of judges that fight for the rule of law, but also what Jakkie said about the concrete problems of her own jurisdiction and the huge amount of knowledge that we have now listening to Elaine and see how Elaine is working with the judiciary. This is a very positive aspect that it should be mentioned and highlighted for me, for European. In most of European countries, we don't have that. So let's have this funding. Let's get this funding because it's well deserved. Well, in a general approach, you know that there are many issues that are now confronting us with the problem. The crisis of rule of law and democracy fatigue, as they say, but also the lack of leadership on these issues. That is why it's so important to have a different approach to the managerial duties of every leader on this regard, but also more complex philosophical problems. It is clear now, at least for me, that there is not such a thing of a neutral judge. Neutrality, a cucumber will be neutral, but it's not possible for a judge to be neutral in that sense. We have all our weight, all our baggage behind us, our cultural inheritance, our backgrounds that are in the court every day. So this idea of neutrality that for long years were very active in trying to see how the judge work is now getting absolutely overruled. Also, this idea of the judge being like obeyed in an irrational manner, like a sacred duty. It's impossible. Now we must justify our decisions with reasoning. We must enter in a conversation with those who are the litigants, etc. So this kind of approach, not an irrational adherence to our rulings, but a rational and reasonable understanding of what we decide. This persuasive approach is something new that has also a toll on our decision. But this is the way to do it. Not anymore this sacralized role that it's not for modern era. And also the crisis of the law, that is something that it's not much spoken, because many times the law doesn't give us an answer. It goes to these abstract concepts, to this general, the superior interest of the child, for instance. What does it mean in concrete way? So the law many times, and because societies are complex, deliver to the judge finally to find the right answer without giving too much clues. So this is the background and what to do about it. The first thing, and this is important because 2 years ago there was nothing. Now we have a declaration. Now we have this awareness that is global. Now we are talking about this with judges from different parts of the world. So this is more important that one should think of. Of course, there are always the pragmatical speech, but in my court, nothing is happening. In my court, we need something to happen. And it's true, it's also true. But the first step, not speaking about the problem, I think it's being solved. Also due to the United Nations and many others that are engaged on this discussion. The second phase starts, or it's a continuous process, obviously. This has to do with the need to have all these background structures that you mentioned. I think one important issue, they should be controlled by the judiciary, because it's important for us to keep control of all these tools or all these strategies, all these structures that could be think of for judicial well-being. And thank you. Thank you. I learned so much listening to you, and it was really a pleasure to be here. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, José, for those additional insights and reflections. Jakkie, your parting shot?
Thank you. I cannot but totally agree with what José was saying. I noticed in the chat, somebody was saying about stigma. Stigma and silence is what has been holding us back. And yes, with the International Day, the first being celebrated tomorrow, with the declaration, with us talking about this, that is the way forward. The more we talk, the more we communicate, but also the institutionalization of it. It should not be hidden or just be a small part, you know, that first half hour when you have a workshop, that's not enough. It needs to be institutionalized. Wellness and well-being of the judicial officers need to get priority. I wanted to add on that, you know, for us, Ubuntu is an extremely important principle. And Ubuntu basically meaning humanity to others, meaning that I am what I am because of who we all are. And that is, I think, something that is and can be the basis of judicial well-being as well. And sort of based on the basic principles that we find in Ubuntu as well, solidarity and kindness and cooperation, respect and compassion. As far as the institutionalization aspect of it is concerned, I do think it is important that it needs to be integrated within all training aspects. It is important that it be integrated in training, but it needs to be taken beyond that. It needs to be becoming a part of, you know, as you are going to court at 9 o'clock every day, well-being should be part of your daily routines, including the check-ins and the different types of support that we need to provide so that people do not feel overwhelmed and get totally burned out. Because often part of the stress is the frustrations with the way systems, you know, of what we see around us, the way it is within our courts, the frustrations with, you know, then the electricity go off and then there's no water and all. We need to go beyond all of that. And we need to find the coping mechanisms, but it really needs to be an integrated overall approach. And we need to start working out a real workable plan of how we integrate it into everything. It should be part and parcel of the judicial package, to put it like that. I would just like to say thank you again to everybody. And we absolutely, it was so good to be able to hear from everybody's experience. And as a last word, a very, very happy Judicial Well-being Day tomorrow for everybody. And let's hope that this is the first step. And when we are talking again next year on the International Judicial Well-being Day, we can actually really start talking about how things have changed, what new measures we were able to implement, because every small step that we take is a step in the right direction towards our own well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakkie, and thank you, Judge Patel and Wina, for sharing additional thoughts on the chat. Just, you know, really centraling this conversation that we're talking about. And I do love that Judge Wina says that she has a day every month for a massage. Yes. I'll come to you, Ellen, and then have Mati come in last that she can close us off. So please share your final thoughts.
I'm aware that we're over time, so I don't have much to say, other than thank you for the opportunity to come and share some of my work. And it's something I'm really passionate about. And I deeply believe if people get the right kind of what I call psycholiteracy and support, they can get well, even if they've struggled a lot. So I've got a firm belief in people's capacity to develop resilience, to be well. Yeah, and I've seen very exciting developments in that over time. So thank you for the opportunity tonight to meet everybody and to speak a little bit about the work.
Thank you, Ellen. Go for it, Mati.
Okay, I just want to really endorse what all the speakers have said tonight. Those three elements of acknowledging our common humanity, our frailties, our vulnerabilities, the recognition of the threats that we face in this chaotic world order or perhaps disorder that we are living in, and the courage to seek support, even if it be peer support or specialized support, but that we prioritize our well-being mentally and physically. Happy Well-being Day tomorrow, everyone. Thank you, Esther, for this wonderful idea. Thank you, Mumbi, for all your help. Thank you, José, for telling us about the Nauru Declaration. Thank you, Jakkie. Again, Esther, thank you for being here for us this afternoon and teasing out the different elements of the threats that we face. And thank you, Ellen, for all the tips that you've given us. We're very grateful. So I want to thank also the participants who have shared different elements of their packs. It just remains for me to wish you all good luck and a restful evening. Thank you all.
Thank you. Fantastic. And happy International Day of Judicial Wellbeing tomorrow, everyone. It's been a pleasure having you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank